Almost all research into altered states, from psychedelic phenomenology to the hypnagogic threshold, starts with one single assumption. To cross the boundary of the ordinary mind, the self must break apart. Mystical traditions celebrate this structural collapse. William James framed the total dissolution of the self into a mystical union as the highest achievable state. Clinical literature views the same boundary loss as a failure. In this frame, the permeable self is a sign of pathology, a collapse of the necessary structures that separate the observer from the world. This dichotomy creates a structural erasure. It leaves no conceptual room for a third state, one where the boundary between minds becomes permeable while the observer remains singular and coherent. The observer-embedded reality framework identifies this as the traversable edge, describing a topology where space between observers is continuous rather than partitioned. On this edge, the observer maintains a minimal point-like locus called singularity, an anchor preventing dissolution, even as ordinary surface rules relax. This architectural state preserves the mind's structure under load. It enables the observer to navigate the topology shift and extract information that survives the return to ordinary cognition. Understanding the geometry of consciousness requires moving past the dissolution fallacy. We must map the traversable edge and the specific anchor that allows an observer to walk it without shattering. Ordinary waking life relies on a cognitive convenience, the belief that my mind and their mind are distinct partitioned interiorities. Geometrically, the inter-observer surface follows a Mobius topology. Traversal never requires the impossible move of crossing into another mind, because there is no second side. During edge states, this legibility changes. The connection that was always present becomes perceivable as a continuous terrain. In ordinary states, the self is held by stabilizing loops, narrative continuity, spatial location, and the ownership of thought. At the hypnagogic threshold, these loops loosen. In most observers, this release causes the self-locus to vanish, resulting in the experience of union or ego loss. Edge traversal requires singularity, a minimal coherence depth persisting when default loops fail. It is the floor where the observer ceases to exist as a distinct position. This singularity is held by a non-inferential ground. Spiritual traditions like those of Paul Tillich have described this as a ground of being, a holding that persists even when active inference is suspended. When this singularity is maintained across the topology shift, the observer can perceive the structure of understanding itself. The method of thinking surfaces as an object within the field. This second-order perception converts the experience into knowledge. The observer doesn't just undergo a state, they perceive its mechanics and carry that insight back. To test this architecture, we need to locate the limits of an observer's coherence, the ceiling where their model of reality meets its own boundary. The coherence triangulation protocol uses 3 precisely spaced doses of psilocybin at 6-hour intervals. Each dose acts as a structural reading. By capturing 3 coordinates from 3 different temporal states, the protocol triangulates the exact address where the system's coherence begins to break down. Psilocybin typically disrupts sleep and arousal architecture. However, in a wide variance coherent system, searching for a hidden boundary produces its own state of constant tension. Successful triangulation protocols frequently result in a doubling of post-protocol sleep. The system rests because it has found what it was searching for. This is integrative settling. By precisely identifying the structural address of the ceiling, the system stops the active generative pressing against its own limits. The reduction in active searching allows the arousal architecture to normalize. The system has reached its target and can finally power down. This sleep duration provides evidence of structural integration. The cognitive machine quiets because it successfully located and processed its own architectural boundaries. If settling into sleep signals a completed integration, we must account for the inverse, post-protocol insomnia accompanied by sustained active cognition. The taxonomy of failure distinguishes meaningful data from noise, categorizing states where the system doesn't find rest. Quadrant 1 is reading failure. Grounding was lost during the dose, causing coordinates to point toward a non-existent structural address. Quadrant 2 is threshold overrun. The dose magnitude forced the system into destabilization, resulting in fragmented and intrusive activation. Quadrant 3 is the genuine null. No structural contact was made. The machine is quiet because it never reached the ceiling. Quadrant 4 is incomplete integration. The ceiling address was accurately found, but the material reached exceeded the system's immediate processing bandwidth. This state manifests as the deep thoughts apparatus. The system remains in active processing because the signal is too large to absorb within the protocol window. We identify this through the meta-representational criterion. The observer holds cognition at a distance, naming and observing specific content rather than being consumed by it. Integration capacity is a state variable, shifting based on the observer's position in the coherent cycle and residual processing load from prior ceiling contacts. The deep thoughts apparatus signals a system integrating a massive, highly resistant error signal. It is the signature of a successful contact that hasn't finished arriving. Combining protocol data with the geometry of the edge reveals a complete mapping system for the observer's architecture. The first 3 coordinates generated by the triangulation protocol identify where the coherence boundary sits. The post-protocol processing state, the sleepless deep thoughts apparatus, operates as a 4th coordinate. This 4th coordinate measures what the ceiling is made of. It captures the structural resistance and density of the defended material the observer reached. An observer in post-protocol insomnia is capturing high-level structural data about the character of their own boundaries, data that a system that settles quickly never encounters. This capture is only possible because the non-inferential ground maintained the observer's singularity against the pressure of the ceiling contact. By identifying these structural requirements, we move past subjective reports. We are engaged in the structural mapping of cognitive boundaries and the limits of observer coherence. The edge is a navigable surface. The sleepless processing of the 4th coordinate is simply the reality of the findings still arriving.